kids, welcome to Mr. Wixson's history class. I'm not just in school anymore, I'm also here in the computer to teach you about the New Deal. There is so much to learn about the New Deal, it's tough to even know where to begin. But I guess a good place to begin would be the Great Depression, because the New Deal came out of the Great Depression. Everything in the New Deal was a response to the Great Depression. So, you already know what the Great Depression was. It started with the stock market crash in 1929. Banks closed, people lost all their money, and there was no safety net. So after people lost their jobs that they depended on, there was nothing to fall back on. They had no money, they had no savings, because they might have had their savings in a bank.
My husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay. I need cash.
I can't keep it.
So what were they going to do? So there were many people across the country that were very poor because of the Great Depression. And not only that, it didn't look like the country could recover easily from the Great Depression. Banks had shut down, businesses closed. And what was the president to do? Well, the president was Herbert Hoover. He was a Republican, a laissez-faire president. That's right, laissez-faire. I'm sure that'll come up on the Regents exam. It means hands off. It meant that Hoover wanted no government interference in private business. So Hoover, he didn't really do much to help out the Americans that were affected by the Great Depression. He passed small tariffs here, he lowered the taxes a little bit there, but he really just thought America needed some confidence. He said, oh, there's nothing that we cannot recover from on our own. So Hoover tried to go around, he tried to encourage people, he tried to encourage businesses, but do you think that worked? Not really. This was a terrible depression. So the stock market crash happened in 1929. He was up for re-election again in 1932. And people were so poor that they started living in little shanty towns, many Americans, just on the side of the road or next to railroad tracks, wherever they could find. And they'd live in homemade tents or in old railroad cars. And these became known as Hoovervilles. So very much making fun of the leader, the president of the United States, saying, look, we're so poor, we live in one of Hoover's villages, a Hooverville. Needless to say, in 1932, Hoover was not reelected. So you can see his response was really just to try and give the United States confidence, to basically step back and hope they get out of it themselves. And the next president that comes in, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he will have a very much more active role.
Hoover leaves the White House for the last time as president to share the car of America's president-elect in the traditional ride down Pennsylvania Avenue to the steps of the Capitol and inauguration ceremonies. A nation in the depths of economic depression had elected its first Democratic chief executive in 12 years, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
FDR, he's coming in. He's going to do anything he can. So he's really just throwing any solution he can at America, at American businesses, trying to make things succeed. So the first thing he does, which shows that he's very serious, is he closes the banks. So remember that a large part of this problem was that banks failed, that after the stock market crash, people lost a lot of money, and there wasn't much trust in banks because people had their savings there and now they were gone. So what FDR did, he closed the banks to ensure that they could properly get money back, that they could properly function and not just be subject to fail. Because due to these bank failures, people didn't trust the banks, so what they do with their money? If you didn't trust someone, would you give them your money? No, so people would take their money, they'd put it in their mattresses, they'd put it on their floorboards, they would just hide their money around their house. So that was the first thing that they did. So that tried to reignite confidence in the banks. So FDR, he's going to try anything, and he has three main points to the New Deal. So relief, recovery, and reform. Relief, recovery, and reform. So all of his programs revolve around that. So again, closing the banks, that's giving some relief, but also some recovery. And one of the first main programs that he institutes is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And this was looking at where are the unemployed? Where did people lose their jobs? And who is it important to have working? So a lot of people that weren't employed are young people in cities. and he employed these young men to go to the countryside, to go wherever to work. So that was the CCC. Another important program, and I should say that all these things, it's just an alphabet soup. So you don't really need to know them all, you don't really need to memorize these, but just know that FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he tried a bunch of different programs, and as if he just reached into a bag of Scrabble tiles and pulled out a bunch of letters, and these were the programs, because he was going to try anything to fix the name it, TVA. So that was aimed at areas of the country that were traditionally very poor, that weren't very developed. So in Appalachia, along the Appalachian Mountains, in the South, they went down, they built dams, they built power lines, they provided roads and power to rural communities that really needed the improvement. Okay, a third one is the WPA, which was again trying to give people jobs, give people money, because once they get this job, they get the money, they get to spend the money, so it helps the economy, is the WPA. And this was for artists, for filmmakers, because also they were affected by the Depression. They didn't have jobs, so this was giving them some money. A lot of it was sort of became pro-government stuff. Some would say like propaganda, but going out and looking at the country and creating art about what was going on in the country. So a lot of the great photography of the time, a lot of films came out of the WPA because it was employing artists. So that was a lot of the relief and the recovery part, and now reform. So what caused this Great Depression? Stock market crash, because there were some shady things going on with the stock market. There were some shady things going on with the banks, not quite legal. And so to prevent something like this happening again in the future, FDR passed a program called the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. I'm not even sure of that. I'll put it on the screen right here. The FDIC, which insures the money that you put in the bank. So at the time it was about $5,000. Now it's about $10,000. Previous to this, it was simply the bank that would say, okay, yeah, trust us. Give us your money. We'll tell you. It'll be here. Don't worry. And now it's the federal government saying, okay, when you put your money in the bank, we will make sure it will be there. We will ensure, even if the bank somehow fails. Another organization, another government agency that's still around today, that still plays an important role, is the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission. So that oversees the stock market. So again, there was some bad stuff going on that caused the Great Depression, some illegal activity, and the SEC steps in to try and oversee and ensure that everything that's going on is lawful. Another very important program that is still with us today is the Social Security Administration. So that is where you ensure that people have a retirement to live off of, so that later in life they collect Social Security. So maybe you'll hear it in the news, but also maybe your parents or grandparents will talk about Social Security, and when they get old they receive their Social Security check. And they have paid into the system over time to get their Social Security when they retire. And this again is trying to jumpstart the economy. So some other programs that ended up being scrapped because they were called unconstitutional: the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which tried to pay farmers to not produce. That was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Remember, checks and balances. And the other one that was ruled unconstitutional was the National Recovery Administration, the NRA. And we'll get into that later, the whole court packing scheme. But that was a long list of programs. Those were the main programs. Again, you don't have to memorize them all. But just to know, they'll call it the alphabet soup. This is the New Deal. So CCC, TVA, WPA. It's just FDR. He's trying to do anything to give people jobs, to get people going again, to give people confidence in the economy. And then things like the FDIC, SEC, Social Security. It's reforming how the government acts so that in the future we can prevent a Great Depression. So FDR, he was looking for anything, and he found a very powerful tool in these agencies that he created. So come back next time. We'll talk more about the New Deal, but also get into World War II.